so that they become pointiest elements on a much larger canvas that speaks to the mysteries of human personality and the unexpected effects of decisions made by individuals and societies. Here is another striking thing about Oppenheimer. It's not just about Oppenheimer, although the film is dominated by Murphy Ann's creepy face and haunting but opaque eyes. The story also tells the story of the impact of Oppenheimer's personality and decisions on other people by the strong-willed members of his atomic bomb development team, including Benny Safdie and Edwin Teller, who wanted to bypass the creation of the much more powerful hydrogen bomb. And then did, bullied Kitty, the mistress of Oppenheimer, and Jean Tatlock, Florence Pugh, with some Gloria Graham and number 039 spontaneous ardor, General Groves, who likes Oppenheimer despite his arrogance, but has no intention of helping the American government, and even Harry Truman, the American president who ordered the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, played in a wonderful cameo by Gary Oldman, and who mocks Oppenheimer as naive and narcissistic crybaby who sees history primarily through his own senses. Jennifer Lemon's editing is prismatic and relentless, often in a faintly Terrence Malick way, jumping between 3 or more time periods in seconds. It's married to Ludwig Göransson's almost non-stop music, which mixes with equally non-stop dialogue and monologues to create a quirky but distinctive scientific revelation aria, and it's probably what it would feel like to read American Prometheus while listening to it. Playlist of Philip Glass film scores. Such non-linear films better capture the pinball movements of human consciousness than linear films, and also what it's like to read a third-person omniscient book, or a biography that allows you to imagine what its subjects might have thought or felt. Paradoxically, it also captures the mental process of reading a text and reacting to it emotionally and viscerally and intellectually. The mind remains anchored to the text. But it also jumps beyond that, connecting the text to other texts, external knowledge, and own experience and imagination. This review will not delve into the actual story of the plot or inspiration of the film, not because it is not important, of course it is, but because, as always with Nolan, the main appeal is not the story, but the telling. Derided as less playwright than half performer, half mathematician, Nolan makes great, overly complicated blockbusters that are as much puzzles as stories. But whether that characterization were true, and I am increasingly convinced that it never quite is, it does not seem apt when one sees how thoughtfully and satisfactorily it is applied to the life of a real person. Oppenheimer. In retrospect, it may seem like a turning point for the director and cinematographer, as he takes all the stylistic and technical conventions he's perfected in intellectual pulp blockbusters over the last 20 years and turns them upside down. The film is an academic psychedelic biopic like the Oliver Stone films of the 1990s, within inches of their lives, sometimes like the park bench scene in JFK, extended to 3 hours. There is also some dark humor in the Stanley Kubrick mode, such as when senior government officials meet to review a list of potential Japanese cities to bomb, and the man reading the list says he made the executive decision to eliminate Kyoto because he and his wife was there on their honeymoon. The Kubrick connection is further strengthened by Full Metal Jacket, star Matthew Modine co-starring as American engineer and inventor Vannevar Bush. It's an example of a high-quality studio-produced hit, art with a touch of ingenuity reminiscent of Michael Mannon's The Insider, late-period Terrence Malick, a touchstone of non-linearly edited art house cinema, such as Hiroshima Mon Amour, Pawnbroker, All That Jazz and Picnic Hanging Rock, and inevitably, Citizen Kane. There is even a rosebud mystery that Oppenheimer and his hero Albert Einstein, played by Tom Conti, talked about by a Princeton pond. Most shows have some old film and the feeling when the actors cut their lines and don't move their faces as much as in a more modern story. Much of the dialogue is delivered quickly, creating a screwball-like energy. This appears most strongly in the arguments between Robert and Kitty over her sexual discretion and refusal to listen to his mostly polite advice, more abstract discussions of power and responsibility between Robert and General Groves, and scenes between Strauss and a Senate assistant, Alden Ehrenreich, who advises him when he testifies before a commission hoping to confirm Dwight Eisenhower and #4President. 039 Cabinet. But as a physical experience, Oppenheimer is something completely different. It's hard to say exactly what and number 039. It's so exciting. I've already heard complaints that the film is too long, that it could have ended with the first bomb going off, and it could have, and has, without Oppenheimer's sex life and Strauss's hostility, and that it is perversely self-defeating to devote so much of the show's time, including a large part of a third, to it. For 2 government hearings, one where Oppenheimer is trying to renew his security clearance and Strauss is trying to get accepted into Eisenhower's cabinet. But the film's violently entropic tendencies complement theoretical debates about the hows and whys of individual and collective personhood. To a greater or lesser extent, all characters are brought to justice and held accountable for their inconsistencies, hypocrisies, and sins. The court is there in the dark. Wind received information but was not told what to do, which must be the case. The latter forms a full-length story about pettiness, mediocrity, and envy. Strauss is the Salieri to Oppenheimer's Mozart, regularly and often pathetically reminding others that he also once studied physics and that he is a good person, unlike the adulterous and pro-communist Oppenheimer. That film claims that Strauss leaked an FBI file about his progressive and communist associations to a third party, who then wrote the agency and director J. Edgar Hoover. The film often talks about a principle of quantum physics, according to which observing quantum phenomena with a detector or instrument can change the results of that experiment. Editing illustrates this by constantly reshaping our perception of an event to change its meaning, and screenwriting does this by adding new information that undermines, contradicts, or expands our understanding of why a character did something, or whether they even knew why they did it. I think it is really Oppenheimer. There is much more than the atomic bomb itself or even its effect on the war and the Japanese civilian population that is talked about but not shown. The film shows what the atomic bomb does to human flesh, but it is not an actual reenactment of the attacks on Japan. A distressed Oppenheimer imagines the Americans going through it. This film decision may be against both viewers who wanted a more direct report on the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and those who accepted the arguments of Strauss and others that the bombs had to be dropped because otherwise Japan would never have surrendered. The film does not say whether it thinks that interpretation is true, or whether it is more on the side of Oppenheimer and others who argued that Japan was on its knees in World War II at that point and then surrendered without the nuclear attacks, which killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. No, this is a film that allows itself the liberties and pleasures of writers, poets, and opera composers. It does what we expect it to do: dramatize the lives of Oppenheimer and other historically important people in his orbit in an aesthetically bold way, while letting every character and every event be used metaphorically and symbolically. The desert, or the little ones that continue to explode in Oppenheimer's life, sometimes because he himself pressed the big red button in a moment of anger, pride, or lust, and sometimes because he made a naive or a thoughtless mistake that pissed someone off long ago and wrongly the victim takes revenge in time bomb fashion. Fissile cutting, to borrow a word from physics, is also a metaphor for the domino effect caused by individual decisions and the chain reaction that causes other things. This principle is also illustrated by the repeated images of colors in the water, beginning with opening close-ups of raindrops triggering widening circles on the surface, foretelling the end of Oppenheimer's career as a government advisor and public figure, and the first nuclear weapon at Los Alamos, which observers see, then hear, and finally feel in all its horror was effective. The faces that bear the weight of the film and its interests and meanings, not only Oppenheimer and number 039, but also those of other famous characters, including General Leslie Groves, Matt Damon, Los Alamos and number 039, military controller, Robert Hahn's long-suffering wife Kitty Oppenheimer, Emily Blunt, whose tactical mind could have prevented many disasters if only her husband had listened, and Lewis Strauss, Robert Downey, Jr., chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, who despised Oppenheimer for a number of reasons, including his decision to distance himself from his Jewish roots, and who spent several years trying to derail Oppenheimer's tenure. Los Alamos Quarry. The latter forms a full-length story about pettiness, mediocrity, and envy. Strauss is the Salieri to Oppenheimer's Mozart, regularly and often pathetically reminding others that he also once studied physics and that he is a good person, unlike the adulterous and pro-communist Oppenheimer. That film claims that Strauss leaked an FBI file about his progressive and communist associations to a third party, who then wrote the agency and director J. Edgar Hoover. The film often talks about a principle of quantum physics, according to which observing quantum phenomena with a detector or instrument can change the results of that experiment. Editing illustrates this by constantly reshaping our perception of an event to change its meaning, and screenwriting does this by adding new information that undermines, contradicts, or expands our understanding of why a character did something, or whether they even knew why. They did it.